Welcome to Future Ready Visionaries for New Tomorrows. Today I'm super thrilled to share some time with Gail Larsen, our wonderful guest, because we are going to talk about one of the fears that people list in their top 5, the fear of public speaking. And here we are in Future Ready, embarking on this conversation of new tomorrows. How can we vision them? How can we create change? And Gail talks about, in her wonderful book, Transformational Speaking, if you want to change the world, tell a better story. And so we all have stories within us. And if we have this fear of speaking, how can we change the world when we daren't even say what's in our hearts? And Gail, you're going to get a kick out of this. When I was beginning to formulate my introduction of you, I was thinking about quoting that very statement about the fear of public speaking. And then I realized, wait a minute, I was one of those people who had a fear of public speaking.
And so was I.
And what's so fascinating about that fear of public speaking, because it feels so far away now, is that it was a fear even greater than death itself. And because death seems so out there, but the fear of public speaking and what could happen is so immediate in our consciousness. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that. But before we go there, I wanted to share that you have been in this world of public speaking for a very long time. You're an expert when it comes to coaching and really getting people to communicate their stories and to communicate in such a way that they feel powerful and effective in their lives, in their careers, and in their relationships. You were a former executive vice president of National Speakers Association for many years. Can't wait to hear more about that and how that experience and where you are now, you've transitioned that. And also that you teach and train and have trainings for people year-round in learning how to be these incredible speakers. And so without much ado, I would love to just have you start speaking because you're the speaker here. Welcome, Gail, to Future Ready.
Thank you, Navjeet. Yeah, I love the way you expressed that if we're going to be ready for the future, to speak to what we love is absolutely essential. Right. And if we allow fear to shut us down, we don't get to bring our ideas to this juicy mix of what's possible on the planet right now.
Right.
And so this fear thing is big. I love that Fritz Perls said, fear is excitement without the breath.
Mm-hmm.
But I also realized as you were speaking that my own fear of speaking began to lessen as I became clear about what I'm here to do, but also as I started feeling more of an internal power rather than waiting for the world to reflect back to me that I'm okay. So that whatever this shift is that we make to who we are and what we care about and the belief we hold in the future is more important than our ego's fear, I think that's when things start getting juicy and we're able to bring forth our voices even more powerfully.
I think that's a powerful point that you're making about the ego. When one thinks about standing on the stage and speaking to a group, or it could be, a group of family members, it could be colleagues, it could be a group of children as a teacher. And I think that what happens is that ego is saying, I have to be someone. I have to be validated. I have to have the information and the data for people to consider me real. And so what would you say to that conversation of me feeling that ego's talking at you so you can't even hear what your story is? What is that wonderful gift that you want to share, the message that is so important to you? What would you say to get clarity in that?
I think it's really about balancing soul and ego. The soul has a message. The soul wants to speak. The soul wants to be alive and be heard. And ego gives us the form to do that. So I think if they can work in partnership, not with one ahead of the other, because if the soul gets out ahead, there's not the structure. If the ego gets out ahead, it doesn't have the fullness and the strength. So how do we recognize that both are really important and start getting them aligned? I've been teaching this in my online course, and someone wrote and said, I've always heard that the ego needs to be the servant. And I said, well, there's that way of looking at it, but there's a lot of people with soulful messages that never move them forward because of the lack of ego strength.
Right.
So we need both.
And who wants to be a servant? I mean, nobody. I can't imagine the ego saying, oh, sure, I'll be your servant because it's for the higher good. I mean, just the idea, or sometimes people say, kill the ego because ego's the bad guy. But I love what you're saying, to have that inclusivity, that there's a space for each of these aspects and there's an expertise within each of these aspects.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because there's just this part of it that they both want to express. They both want to be seen. And I've really seen over time that the ego in support of a higher purpose can work very well. So when we get really clear about bringing our unique gift forward and very clear about our message, then I think our ego gets in line because it wants to be seen in its distinctive original quality. So I think they can start coming together in a really beautiful dance.
That's wonderful. So talk to us a little bit about the story that you speak about. There's a story that we can tell, and to tell a better story. Now, sometimes when we have a story, it can just go on and on and on. Sometimes we have a story.
And it does.
I've had a few of those. We have a story which is very sad and maudlin, and it's kind of a story of victimization. And then sometimes we have a story which is very personal and private that we're not quite ready to share. So could you tell us a little bit about the story, what it is, how you discern it, and how we can better understand our own stories?
Well, clearly our life is full of stories. And I believe when talking to an audience, that story is what holds the power. There's a Native American saying that says, tell me a fact and I'll listen. Tell me a truth and I'll hear, but tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever.
Yes.
So the story is that emotional level. I talk about 4 levels of engagement. That third level is story because it can touch the soul and then affect how we think and how we act. And I honestly believe that without it, we don't have a chance of really putting forth change and getting people to support what we're bringing forward.
Could you speak more about that? Why is that so? And I appreciate what you said about the Native American saying, and I resonate with that very much. But tell us more about the story. Like, why do we resonate so much with stories?
Well, I think we're hardwired for it. It's how we've learned for centuries.
Yeah.
Telling the stories. Yeah. And probably we felt them more before the written word. So now there's many other ways that we learn. I mean, look at the difference now between when we're wanting information going online rather than asking an elder, for example.
Right.
But I got in touch with this when I was studying with the shamanic teacher Alberto Villoldo. And he talked about, actually he applied this to the body and how we heal, but it's similar to the speaker and how we hear. So in the body, in our Western medicine, if there's a symptom, well, let's fix it. Let's do an operation, or let's provide a prescription and see if we can get rid of it. So then as we move to mind-body medicine, we engage the mind, and then how we think about something can cascade down and affect how we think. But the higher level is that third level of soul. In indigenous cultures, if they're working on touching the soul, it's going to be ritual, song, story. So when we use story and music and poetry and ritual in our speaking, we can bring people into another level of engagement, because when the soul is touched, then it will affect how we think and how we act. So I always work with story first, because that's what will captivate someone so they can more listen to the vision, the possibility, the call to action that we as speakers put forward.
Do you think it's because when we're speaking about story, or if there's ritual, it engages our imagination? There's a level of the interior that is moved or invoked or drawn that allows us to feel connected? Is it that we connect in the story, where it's not just we're being told a fact, or this, for instance, there's many examples you give in your book, Transformational Speaking, from people being in a very particular way in their lives, in their work or career, to doing the course and then having a whole different way of expressing themselves through story, very personal, poignant moments. Is it because they're sharing something that allows us to be a part of their experience?
Yeah, I teach the difference between what we think we want in speaking, which is a comfort zone, to the home zone. Because the comfort zone is having your facts, having your credentials, having your professional persona show up and do a good job. The ego loves that. But if we stop there, it's really forgettable. That's a good speaker, but it's not that transformational speaker that's going to really bring forth the capacity for change. So the home zone is the personal connection. It comes through stories, and it's not the fact of the stories, it's how we tell it.
Yes.
And when we tell it, we're almost like reliving it.
Yes.
So we're there, and we're touching the vulnerability, and we're touching the emotions. When we touch ourselves, when we're connected with ourselves, then there's that emotional availability to the audience, and they feel it. And when they feel it, then something can shift. But it ends up being just more information, this blah, 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 blah. It doesn't land.
Right. So I have a real question for you. And not that all the other questions aren't real, but this question is kind of in my heart, because I'm thinking about the situation that we're experiencing in the world between Israel and Palestine. And I'm thinking about what can the Gazan people say or do to communicate a need for change in the experience that they're having. I mean, we're seeing tremendous amount of news coverage of the situation, where there's real stories, real concern. What can people do? And maybe this is not the area, but I feel that it is. It's about real communication. What would you say in such a situation?
Well, I was really moved by a book last year that I read called Winning the Story Wars.
Oh, great, yeah.
And it's like either side of an argument has a good story. What is the overarching story that holds the interests of both stories?
Right.
And he used a great example of, say, the 99%. The story being, hey, this country is based on everyone having a fair shot. Everyone can make it. Tea Party. Hey, this country was based on escaping too much government and taxation. They're both great stories. But our own divisiveness as a country in the United States, we're not doing so good either. So what is, who's going to have the imagination to come up with an overarching story that can elevate both to see where we connect? I think that's our job now.
Right.
It's not for the faint of heart because there's so much divisiveness.
Yes, yeah, and thank you for saying that. And that's the purpose that I have for this Future Ready series, is to really see what imagination, what creativity is going to create those connections, those neural connections that are just misfiring right now, whether that's in families or in tribes or amongst nations. Is where can we connect, and that's why coming back to the stories is so important. And in your work you talk about that each person has their original medicine. Could you talk about that? Because I think that's an important aspect of the storytelling.
And trusting ourselves that we have something to say.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a belief from original cultures that we come to this earth with gifts and talents that are nowhere else duplicated, each one of us.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a society that says fit in, line up, do it this way, don't make waves. And we can often forget what's original. And it can be kind of numbed out.
Mm-hmm.
So in my work, I really encourage people to touch back into that originality. Because the second part of the teaching is, if you don't express it, it's lost to the world for all time. So what would life be like if we were all expressing our original medicine? I look at it as the web of life being fragmented right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because, okay, we align here, we align here. What if we started being our true medicine?
Mm-hmm.
Could we start creating a web that's whole and strong?
Mm-hmm.
Trusting each one of us to bring to the table what we are uniquely capable of offering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so when you share that wisdom with your students, with people participating in the workshops, what kind of response do you get? I mean, do people immediately resonate with that knowing, or do they feel confused because it just seems like, what is my message? What is my purpose? Like, I have I want things, but there's a whole barrage of other things, and so others may never feel like they get to that original medicine. How do you help them get there?
It's the first thing I do in the workshop, and we spend a whole afternoon on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's so fundamental. Until we trust that, we're just sort of shooting in the dark, blind. You know, let me try this. Let me try this one. Let me be this. It's crazy making.
Yes.
So to go back to what you originally said about fear of speaking, when we are so clear about our medicine, and then later we add that message to it. If you had 1 minute to speak, what is it you most want to say? It simplifies and clarifies everything. So we spend probably 3.5, 4 hours on this, and the way we get to it is I ask them to partner with someone in the class that they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Person who knows you the least. Because we can get caught in our old story about ourselves that says we're not okay, or someone who knows us can remember the times we've been really crazy and haven't, brought forth our best. And they can be stuck in an old version of us as well. So I'm wanting people to have the reflection of someone new, an important stranger, who sees us now and can give an accurate reflection, because we get in jet lag. It's a phrase I got from my teacher, Angela Sarian. We get in jet lag about who we've become. And my 4 days of transformational speaking is for people to get current, not to come in with what you've always been saying.
Right.
To give yourself the space to see what's alive now, where life has brought us. I love that Gertrude Stein said if we already knew it, it would not be creation but dictation. And if we're going to be approaching a future that we want to be part of in a positive way, we have to give up dictation from an old mindset. We need to be in that creation of now.
Yes. Now, is that part of the energetics of change that you've spoken about? Is that, getting into a different mindset in terms of relating to yourself so that you can be in a creation mode and not just be a channel of the stuff you do. It's an automatic pilot.
Yeah, things changed very dramatically for me when I studied David Hawkins' book, Power versus Force.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when we're creating change, we look at whatever our background is. And we say, well, if I've been a CEO in the business world, but now I've had a different calling, my job is to bridge what I know back to these people so that they can wake up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it sounds good. And you may have more credibility to do that. But when you start looking at the energetics, you realize that when we can stand at a higher vibe, and this is just like 1 to 1,000, what's the energetic of any emotional state? The energetic of depression is going to be under 200.
Mm-hmm.
The energetic of joy is 540. So you can say, well, what it helped me realize is that when we can hold that higher energy, that higher vibe of joy, we are going to influence the state, the emotional state of 750,000 people below 200.
Mm.
So we never have to talk to someone. If we can hold this higher vibration, things are going to start moving up anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So when we start getting that, yeah, it does work to speak to the choir,
Right.
to preach to the choir. When we get around the people who bring our vibe up,
Mm-hmm.
and we allow that expression, our connecting on this level makes all the difference. So there's a growth in consciousness that we are directly responsible for without ever speaking to people at the lower level. So if we try to bridge, what happens to our energy? Gee, I gotta edit here. I gotta rehearse a little. I gotta make sure they can hear me. Where the other possibility is standing so firmly in our medicine and so clear about our message that we're going to start finding the people who line up like a barcode with who we've become, and that's going to create better change than more change than wearing ourselves out trying to be a messenger to people who just really can't hear us.
And what is the experience, let's say, if you are experiencing that lower vibration, if you're depressed or you're going through calamity and you've got a speaking engagement or you've got a video to make or you have, a wedding speech to make, what happens then? Because then it's an interesting place to navigate because on the one hand, truly you may be feeling very crushed. You may be feeling pretty down. On the other hand, you've got a commitment to show up, maybe to inspire, to uplift. So how do you go from where you are, your experience, which is informing you, it's growing you in some ways, there's something to learn, to then being this person in front of an audience, in front of a camera, in front of a wedding party, and delivering?
Well, I think this is when we ask. This is when we pray a lot. Because really, when we're in the truth of that medicine and expressing it, and we're clear about our message, I think that the mystery really wants us to show up and be part of something positive. So to say, okay, I'm really kind of whacked out here today, and I'm not feeling it, and I have a commitment, so I ask for support to stand in my strength and power. So wherever your allies are, in whatever worlds they dwell, to call in those members of our team who we know are going to help us stand in our strength and power to put out what we're here to say.
What would you say what are the components of your core medicine?
Well, medicine can be a very private thing, and it's not it's not a bunch of phrases about who we are.
Right.
It's a small phrase that calls us back to the truth that resonates. So, we don't want to say, I'm helpful, I'm inspiring, I'm smart, who cares? I mean, these are just words. But when you find the words that help you remember the truth of who you are so that we stand in the strength of that, people get so alive. So it's not something we put on our business card or talk about. It's a message we use internally to say who we are. For example, in the class last week, there's a woman who works in conscious leadership. And when she's really inviting leaders to consider different ways of how to be in their organizations than business as usual, you can't do that with preaching.
Mm-hmm.
So she named her medicine the playful edge. Because she's playful, but she's always pushing the edge. So what's it like when she's in front of an intimidating audience to remind herself when she gets up to speak, I'm the playful edge? She's not going to shut down.
Right.
She's not going to say, gee, I wish I hadn't done this.
Right.
She's going to bring that part of herself fully forward.
Right.
So I see examples of it all the time. Mm-hmm. And some of them make no sense whatsoever. I worked with a coach last year who realized that her clients really felt that working with her felt like being enveloped in a warm blanket. But she didn't want to just be a blanket.
Right.
So her medicine was electric blanket. So what does that do for her persona?
Right.
When she gets on stage?
Right.
So it brings both parts of her forward.
I love that.
Just as in playful edge, I'm going to be playful, but I'm taking you to an edge.
Right.
So it's a description of who we are at our best.
Right.
So when we're feeling like, oh, I wish I hadn't said yes to this thing today, then we call forth that medicine and realize if we don't express it, it's lost to the world for all time. And we can reframe it as an opportunity rather than a commitment.
Right.
And show up in a different way.
Yeah, that's very powerful. With your experiences, and you've had a whole range of wonderful adventures and real life lessons. How do you story the future with all the experience and knowledge and learning that you have had? How do you begin to have a story that you want to speak in terms of your life and the future that you want to create?
I think that, as you were saying earlier, we really need to call on our imagination.
Yes.
There's a great Holly Near song, Can You Call on Your Imagination, as if telling a myth to a child. Bring in the beautiful and bring in the romantic, the brave, and the wild. So how imaginative can we get? Because often we don't see the way we want it to be.
Right.
We're seeing so much dissolution. I like to hold it as the last gasp of an old way.
Yes.
People are fighting and hanging on like crazy for something they don't want to let go of because they can't see a different possibility. Or they're so invested that this is where their power is. So it's hard to let go if it's working for you.
Yeah, definitely.
If it's not working for us, which is true for probably the 99%, then how imaginative can we be with a different story that we, in some ways, have to make up?
Right.
And I think it's an interesting time of that interim time. John O'Donohue talks about it in one of his blessings, where the path has been washed out behind us, but we can't see ahead. And how do we hold the interim time when we only know that's gone, but we don't know the new story yet?
Right.
It calls on a lot of inner strength to trust. But I had a friend visiting last last month, Manuel Makeda, and he said, in a society that says we always have to know and we always have to do, we don't take the time to be still so that new wisdom can come in. And that's so stuck with me because we're looking for wisdom. You're talking about the conflict, Palestine and Israel. We're looking at the conflict between factions in our own country that we're just at the point where, what do we do with this?
Right.
And so what is it like to not know and to see if by not overreacting or pushing an agenda that something new could come in and inform us if we're willing to be still.
Yeah.
That's not too admired in our society.
No, I think that it's not admired and it's not very productive. I mean, that's the conclusion. If you're sitting around, next to a tree pondering the beauty of the bark, how is that going to help people in Palestine? But that's not the point. The point, I think, is that, and I agree with you about the imagination, is that and this is how I think of it, if we daren't even allow ourselves to imagine it, how are we even going to have the courage to create something other than the current system? I mean, as you were speaking about the 99%, I thought to myself, that's so interesting that the 99% feel dissatisfied. Isn't that an old story that we're in? That 99% of 100 are not happy with the way things are. Not in everything, obviously, but with a majority of the things, 99% are not happy. What a story to be a part of, because I see stickers saying, I'm part of the 99%. I see one in my neighborhood, and I think to myself, yeah, you think you're 99%, you've got a house, you've got a, nice efficiency vehicle standing outside, you probably have food every day. For somebody in another part of the world who doesn't have food, doesn't have any transportation, you are part of the 99%. And so the 99% is a very interesting place to belong to or have allegiance with. But do I want to be part of that 99%? Like we were saying about the ego, make it your servant. I don't necessarily want to be part of that 99% that's dissatisfied. I want to be part of humanity that is inspired, illuminated, imaginative. And it's fascinating to me how, as we were saying, how we daren't even dream, imagine, vision whatever we want. Whether that's peace in Palestine, whether that's, no more fossil fuel or end of hunger. We don't always have to start with the how, but just the desire to allow that possibility to happen. And I think that imagination, stories are a way for the imagination to communicate to us.
Absolutely.
Magic. Yeah.
And I work with 4 questions with people to find where we're inspired to step up and serve. Because actually, Navjeet, I think if I say to you, for example, I'm really concerned about wildlife. We will have a forest fire and say, luckily no lives were lost. Please. The beautiful four-leggeds and the birds and the insects, they're wiped out. And so how, if I tell you that I really care deeply about this, if that's something you care about, we can start imagining together, but we have to put it out.
Right.
So the questions I ask people to really look at where you want to envision a new possibility, first is what delights you and brings you alive.
Right.
David White in his poem, Sweet Darkness, said, anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you.
Oh, I love that.
So let's get alive.
Yeah.
And then the second question is, what breaks your heart? I have a friend who is in such heartbreak about the children at the border escaping Central America. And what they're getting away from, and then what they're the resistance here. That's breaking her heart. So that's a call. That's where you're going to put your imagination.
Right.
Then the third one is, what does healing look like? That's your big imaginative call, right?
Right.
What could it look like?
Exactly.
And then the fourth question is, what am I willing to do consistently with love?
Right.
Because we get caught into this ain't it awful thing.
Yes.
What isn't working? And if we're not willing to take one thing that brings us alive, breaks our heart, where we can envision healing and do something, we're never gonna move.
Right, exactly.
So start small. If you do your part, I do mine, everyone listening does theirs. We're starting to rethread and reweave that web of life in a way that we can mend what's broken. But as long as we sit back and think it's hopeless and too big, nothing changes.
Nothing changes, yeah. And I think it's that consistency and that commitment to it that will bring and create those steps that we want to shape our world. So tell me, what do you vision? Show me a wonderful future that you have imagined, dreamed, sung in, danced in, love. Share that with us.
There's a couple that really speak to me right now. I spoke to the one about kinship with all of life and my love for the animals.
Right.
And my next step is in October, to spend some time at the Earth Fire Institute in Wyoming and be in relationship with wild animals for 4 days. And I have a sense that's going to change something very deeply within me.
Yeah.
That this is not a species to be saved. This is a relationship to be nourished.
Right.
So where will that lead? I don't know. But the point of going there is conversation with other people who feel that call as well.
Right.
Another that's really big for me, because I had a recent accident. It's always been big. I would say for 30 years I've been finding places I wanted to live that I would bring other people to and say, let's do this. So when I lived in Phoenix, I brought 7 friends and I said, let's buy this orange grove and all move in and figure out what we want to create. And everyone loved it, but no one would do it.
Right.
I moved to Washington State 5 years ago. Same vision. Sounds good, not now. I did for 5 years a venture called Journeywell Center for Integrative Health, where people did put the money and intention and planning to create a center for really making our own decisions about our health in a time when it's pretty confusing with a lot of options, where the people who invested really wanted to live there and develop our programs and create community. And then this accident I had a few months ago, I needed a lot of help, and I live alone. And it has re-inspired me to look at this weirdness. I mean, when you are taken out of your life instantly and in the hospital for 3 weeks, as I was, there's a lot to manage that you are calling on everybody. And it's an insane way to live, really. I'm just getting that there's new ways to live that I want to start imagining.
So what would that look like?
Others. Well, it's interesting because right before this happened, a month before, in the neighborhood I lived, there are 4 single women in this cul-de-sac, and we had dinner. And we all said, well, we don't need this yet, but what would it look like? Well, I was the one who needed it quickly. So these women became really wonderful support for me, along with my network of friends. But I don't think it looks like, I mean, maybe it does right now. It looks like people who are able to show up and walk my dog or bring me a meal or to keep me company when it's harder to go out and have the mobility right now. So that's a start. To just be willing to say, I need help, and to accept it lovingly. But it shouldn't take an accident to be able to do that. So
Yeah.
maybe it's saying, what do I long for
Yes.
in my relationship with other people?
Yes.
And to start putting that out there and saying, I think the way we live is insane. I want more connection.
Yes. Yes.
What might that look like? And start having conversations to see what new story might emerge.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. What new stories? And I think that I saw this great little ad the other day, and it was for what this company did is that they connected these Brazilian kids, teenagers who are learning to speak English, with elderly people in retirement homes. Both of them need connection and practice, and they showed these little video clips of these teenagers speaking English and practicing with these gorgeous people in these retirement homes. And the elderly people were sharing stories, and the kids were listening, and their English was getting corrected and improved. And it was this wonderful, like you're talking about the overreaching, it was creating this wonderful bridging of two needs in a fantastic way, because both were being met. Both those needs were being met. And I think about that, about community and connection, and how as we become more independent, we forget that dependency is not a bad thing. We've kind of swung the pendulum in one direction too much, I think. And so that recognition of dependence, of community, of shouldering the burden together, there's something very powerful and magical and nourishing about that I think through yearning that you're speaking about, through the yearning that I also have. And I don't think it matters what age we're at. We all have that yearning to not be alone. It could be a young mother with a few kids who needs help. It could be a teenager who's feeling they don't get the support or recognition from adults. So community the idea of community is beginning to rise in our collective consciousness. And so I thank you for holding that vision, and I hope that you will continue to nourish that and share with us what arises and occurs in your imagination of what these communities could look like.
And it's starting by having conversations with people.
Yes.
And then sometimes people are going to say, I don't get it.
Yeah.
But I'm finding many others who do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think more and more we're going to have people nodding along and saying, yes, thank you for saying that. Thank you for holding this space. Gail, if there were... you've given us great information, great tools in this interview. If there was one sentence, bring it back to you, if there were one sentence, one message that you want to beam, that is your transmission, what would that be? Would you transmit it to us so that we can receive it and really allow those seeds to germinate within us and to hold that space?
Yeah, your voice matters. We need every voice now. Someone said all hands on deck. It's like, have the courage to deeply explore what you care about and recognize that your wounds transform, do become your source of power. So those stories of things that didn't work, that you're now on the other side of, bring healing for other people and really point the way to what's yours to say and do. So trust your voice, bring it forward, and watch the world transform.
Thank you. What a powerful message that is. And it goes right to the core. I think there's not a single person who wouldn't resonate with that. Everybody wants to feel that their voice matters, who they are is important. So thank you for holding that space in your consciousness and sharing that through your classes. Gail, where can people contact you to get more of your wisdom, to work with you?
Realspeaking.com.
Realspeaking.com. And we will gladly come knocking on your door for some real speaking and some transformational presence on the stage. Thank you so much for joining us today, Gail. It's been a complete pleasure to have you be a visionary and a holder of an incredible future for us all. Thank you.
Thank you. Much
Bye.
love.
Bye.